Hello, and welcome to Kim Reads. We read the final chapter of Among the Hidden, chapter 30. Lee Grant settled into the car that would take him away from the farm where he found refuge. After running away from home, he had gotten lost. He'd certainly never intended to end up here. He surveyed the dusty roads and barnyards in front of him. The ugly ruts of dried mud where tractors and trucks had left their tracks. He stared at the ramshackle barn and the peeling paint on the weatherhouse sites that should have been entirely foreign to him. Luke gulped, unable to keep thinking about his new identity quite yet. It was too soon, too hard, when his shoulders still felt the warmth of his mother's last hug. He looked down at his hands, clenched together in his lap. They had already seemed like someone else against the background of his new crisp trousers. No more rag blue jeans and hand-me-down flannel shirts for him. He had a whole suitcase in the trunk full of the same kind of fancy barren clothes he'd laughed at all those months ago. He didn't care about clothes, but he wished that they let him keep his name, at least. Yet Jen's father had been proud that he'd gotten to keep the same initials. A rush job like this, it's a wonder you're not stuck with Alphonse Xerxes, he bragged on the letter he dropped off the night before, pretending he was coming to ask Luke's parents to cut the willow tree that draped over onto the Talbots' land. The real Lee Grant was a baron. He had died in a skiing accident just the night before. His parents wanted nothing to do with Luke. Too painful, Jen's father had complained, but they agreed to donate their son's name and identity card the way people had once donated hearts and kidneys. Some secret group that had helped third children had arranged it. The group had also agreed to pay for Luke to go to a private school as a boarder year-round. Supposedly, he was transferring in the middle of a new term as a punishment for running away. He'd read about such places in the old books in the attic. It seemed a strange way to live without family, but he was just as glad to have pretended to love another set of parents. Now, Luke back at his family's porch, where Mother and Dad and Matthew and Mark were standing and already waving. Dad and Matthew looked gruff, and Mark looked merely serious, strange enough for him. But tears were strolling down Mother's face. She cried too the night Luke had told his parents everything. He started with the first visit to Jen's house, and Mother immediately scolded. "Oh, Luke, how could you? The danger. I know you're lonely, but honey, promise us never again." "That's not all," Luke said. He told the rest of the story without looking at her until he reached the end in his decision to get a fake ID. Then the sound of sobbing made it impossible to avoid looking. She was red-eyed and devastated. "Luke, you can't," she gasped. "Don't you know how much we'd miss you?" "But, Mother, I don't want to go," Luke said. "It's just that I have to. I can't spend the rest of my life hiding in the attic. What will happen when you and Dad can't take care of me anymore?" "Matthew and Mark will," she replied. "But I don't want to be a burden on them. I want to do something with my life. Figure out ways to help third kids make..." All the things he thought of sounded too childish to explain in the face of Mother sobbing, so he finished weakly. "Make a difference in the world." "I'm not saying you can't do that," she answered. "That's years away. We'll figure out some way to get a fake ID for you when you're grown up. Somehow." She turned to Luke's father. "Tell him, Harlan." Dad sighed heavily. "The boy's right. He needs to go now if he can." Luke could tell his father's words came out painfully, but they still stabbed him. Maybe part of him had been secretly hoping his parents would forbid him to go, but would lock him in the attic and keep him as their little boy forever. I've checked around some quiet like to see if anyone's heard of a third child going to live a normal life. Around here they can't. As far as I can tell, he's not going to get another chance. Luke turned back to his mother, because it was too hard to look at Dad while he was saying that. But the pain-twisting mother's face grew. "And I guess we don't have a choice," she murmured. "That had been 2 days ago. And ever since then, she'd called in sick to work and stayed home, spending every second with Luke. They played board games and cards, but she interrupted every mood with, "Do you remember?" Or "I remember the coups he'd make as a baby, his first steps, his delight in discovering dirt the spring he was 2, the first time he hoed a straight row, the zucchini he'd grown as long as his arm, the bedtime stories, and the tuckings in." She was filling him up with memories, he knew, for the times when he'd have no one to talk to about his childhood. But it was hard to listen to. He wished they could just move their Monopoly pieces and pretend the time wasn't ticking away. But all too soon the morning came. Jen's dad had pulled up in his fancy car and sprang out to shake hands with Luke's parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, thank you very much for reporting this boy's arrival immediately. From what I hear, the Grants were worried sick." He turned to Luke. "Young man, what you did was irresponsible and reckless. The only thing you did was remember to take your ID card. I guess you have heard that the population police shoot first and ask questions later." He clapped Luke on the back and slid his hand down to something to slip into Luke's pocket. Luke reached down to touch the stiff edge of an ID card. His ID card. "Do we have to start pretending already?" Luke's mother whispered, the tears beginning in her eyes. Jen's dad was shaking his head sternly and patting his chest as if looking for something in a hidden pocket. "Bugged," he mouthed. When Luke's parents nodded to show they understood, he stopped, patted, and pulled out an official-looking paper. "Ah, here they are, your travel papers. Your parents are sending you to the Hendricks School for Boys. And if you don't shape up..." Jen's dad gave a stern look that was somehow conveyed his sympathy. Mother cleared her throat. "Would it be alright to give him a goodbye hug? We've gotten kind of fond of him in the time he's been here." Jen's father nodded, and then both Luke's parents held him tight and released him. "Be a good boy now, you hear?" Mother said. Luke could tell she was trying to make it jokey, the way she might talk to some of the other mother's runaway son, but for the life of him, he couldn't come back with a jokey response. He only nodded, blinking hard. And then he stumbled in the car and tried to be Lee. Jen's dad circled on the car and slid in the driver's side. He started the car and pulled out. "You're just lucky you're getting a highly paid chauffeur," he said. "If I weren't a personal friend of your father's cousin..." Luke wasn't sure if there was a hidden message in the words or if Jen's dad was just talking for the sake of the bug. He decided he couldn't analyze it yet. He peered back at his frantically waving family until they were out of sight. Soon the car was passing on the other side of the barn and the field beyond. Views Luke never had seen, though he lived his entire life within 100 yards of them. In spite of the fear gnawing in his stomach and the anguish of missing his family already, he felt a thrill of excitement. There was so much to see. He'd have to tell Jen. The grief he had been avoiding for days welled up over in him again. "I'm doing this for you, Jen," he whispered too softly for Jen's dad or the bug to hear over the car's hum. "Someday when we're all free, all the third children, I'll tell everyone about you. They'll erect statues in your name and name holidays after you." It wasn't much, but it made him feel better. A little. Luke stared back at his family's farm as long as he could. He could just see the roof of Jen's house beyond, the sparse line of trees, and then in no time at all, it seemed everything familiar disappeared over the horizon. Lee Grant turned around to see what lay ahead. Okay, that is the end of Among the Hidden. Thanks for listening. See you next time.